So activation day actually feels kind of far away for me right now, because it's been 8 years since my first child was activated. I guess about seven, and about 4 years since my middle one was activated. But it feels like a lot longer than that, probably because we've been doing it twice. But anyway, even though I feel like we've moved on from that phase kind of finally, I still do remember um, feeling the expectancy of activation day and feeling like our lives were about to change in a whole new way. And looking back, that was definitely true to a degree. So when we got the cochlear implants for our kids, our family assumed a new way of life that took a little growing into. But we were already on that journey. So, either way, we were looking at implants or we were looking at having profoundly deaf children, who would not be aided and would be using sign language. So either way, you're on this journey, but it just kind of moves you to a different phase of the journey. Our lives were already different. And we were just evolving into that new phase of hearing loss with our kids. And this part of the phase would include devices, whereas the first part of the phase did not have devices. So that was definitely a change. It would also include keeping up with the devices, keeping the devices on little heads, and speech therapy out the wazoo. We had so much speech therapy with our kids. So the first time we went through cochlear implant activation day with my now 8-year-old, who was our first child to have hearing loss, I remember like we were just learning everything at that stage. We were new to everything and also new to parenting because he's my oldest child. And I remember that I did have very different expectations. And there were a few things that I didn't feel totally prepared for and that were a little bit different on activation day than I thought it would be. So today I thought it would be helpful to share about 3 things that I wish that I knew or was more prepared for before cochlear implant activation day. And this, I just want to shout out to my Facebook group because this question about activation day came from a member of our Facebook group. So I often ask people in our Facebook group and on the email list what they want to hear on the podcast. What do you guys want to hear? And this was one of those. So if you want to give your input, jump into that group, facebook.com/group/raising deaf kids. Okay, so the first thing that I wish I was more prepared for cochlear implant activation day, and this is a big one that everyone talks about, but it was true for me, was the reaction of my child or the lack of reaction from my child. So of course, before activation day, we looked at videos because of course you do, especially the first time around. And, most of the videos feature big reactions from kids or from, adults. They have this big reaction to hearing for the first time. And that really makes sense to me. Like, this is a completely new and different thing, something that you didn't have before. And it would be kind of a surprise and would be kind of a cool thing. So, to me, like having a big reaction to this is a life-changing thing. It makes sense. That was not how our reactions went with our kids. Okay. Um, Ours were much more subtle. Also, I would like you to know or remind you, in case you've been on this podcast for a while, that my kids were both about 11 to 12 months old when they got their cochlear implants activated. So they were babies, like they were just one or not even one yet. The reactions might be different if you have older kids who are a little bit more aware of what's going on. But ours were subtle reactions. I know my oldest almost didn't react very much. He's kind of like looked around and honestly, like I don't even remember my second child's activation. I hope he doesn't get older and like listen to this podcast episode because I love my little middle child. But I really remember pretty vividly my first child's cochlear implant activation. I do not remember my second child's cochlear implant activation. I was definitely there. Like, I just don't, maybe by that time, having like two children, like 2 and under was a lot. And having a second child with cochlear implants, maybe I just like blocked that out from my mind. I don't know, but I do not remember his his day very well. But there were really subtle reactions from my kids. You had to look closely to see them even react at all. They looked a little bit more confused about what was going on. Once again, they were babies, but they were like looking around, um, kind of looking up in the air, maybe looking for like where the sound was coming from and what this new thing was. But it wasn't like a huge reaction. And then later, honestly, they started crying, which is normal. So actually, our audiologist did prepare us for that part. But I think I was just expecting a bigger reaction than what we got, and we got a really subtle reaction. And I just want you to know that, like, how your kid reacts is not going to inform how cochlear implants are going to go for your kids. Okay. Everybody reacts in different ways. No two kids react in the same way. You even know that if you have multiple children yourself. All of your kids are different. Some have big reactions. They think it's cool. And it's probably different if you have older kids as well. Some kids like barely react or just kind of confused, and some kids start crying. Just because they don't react doesn't mean they don't care, or they may just like not hear it, which will bring us to our next point. And just because they're crying doesn't mean that they are like really upset, that they're uncomfortable, that they're going to hate their cochlears. They're usually, especially if they're younger kids, they're just kind of like expressing communication. Like babies, ours started crying, but they were babies, and that's literally how babies communicate. And that's how young children communicate. Like that's actual communication for them because they don't know the words yet. So all they're saying is that this is kind of new and different for them, which it is. If they hadn't heard before, like mine did, or didn't hear a lot, yeah, it's going to be new and different, and it's going to be kind of weird. But mine, like we gave them some bubbles and stickers, and they immediately started crying, and then they were fine after that. And yours will be too. Um, so also their reaction doesn't gauge how they are going to respond to cochlear implants in the future. But basically, be prepared for any type of reaction, but also be prepared for no reaction. Which brings us to my second point. I was not prepared for, and I don't think this was very well explained to me beforehand. I did not feel prepared that they still couldn't hear, even though they had the cochlear implants activated. And I wasn't prepared for how long it would be until they could hear properly. So in case you don't know, if you're going into this new, they turn on the cochlears very softly at first, which means there are still some sounds and even some speech sounds that your child can't hear yet. And then you go back to the audiologist pretty frequently over the next few months, and they gradually turn up the sound over time, and your child gradually has more and more access to different sounds and speech. Okay. But at first it's on very, very soft. And depending on your child's like level of hearing loss from the beginning, they maybe cannot even hear, or maybe they could hear like sounds, but they can't really distinguish like what the sound is yet. And that is totally normal, but I was more prepared for this the second time around. The first time around, I just thought they turned them on and are ready to go. And thank goodness we have audiologists, and I am so thankful for their education. They are a blessing, because if I was going to reactivate my child's cochlear implants, I was turning them on full blast. I didn't know. I'm not an audiologist. And in retrospect, that would have, I don't know if that would damage their brains, probably not, but it would have been way too much. So it makes sense, now that you know, or when they explain to you, that they turn on softly and gradually turn it up so that your brain can kind of get used to the sounds and processing the sounds. But that means at the beginning, they still may not hear that much, even though they have their cochlear implants activated. And so you also have to factor how long it took to get to like normal speech sounds in their activation into like their speech age when you're talking about when your child starts talking. So your child, if they didn't already have language, if your child's a baby, they're going to talk a little bit later than their regular peers for a while. Because they didn't have the access to sound and didn't learn the language, like the other kids were doing. It's fine. But they're going to be a little bit behind kids their own age. That's fine. It's totally normal. It's not a problem. Um, but I have a lot of people saying, my child's been activated for like 5 months and isn't talking yet. I've heard that a lot. And so you have to think, okay, you got the cochlear implants activated 5 months ago, but it maybe took them like 3 months to get the cochlears turned up enough for them to actually even start hearing enough speech to start learning language. So that 5 months now turns into they've only been actually hearing for 2 months, which is why they're not talking yet. Okay, so you factor this into their speech age too. But suffice to say, I didn't realize that this was going to be so complicated and nuanced at the beginning about what they can hear, when they can hear, how long it's going to be able for them to hear when they get them activated. So just something to think about and be prepared for, that your child is not going to come out like making sounds and talking right out of the gate. It's going to take a while and it's a process. And the third thing that I wanted to talk about was I didn't really realize as much at the moment, but I do now looking back, that this moment, the activation day, really did push us into the next phase of hearing loss and this process for our kids. I didn't know that we were going to come home with a whole, book bags of stuff that I then had to like organize and figure out what it all was. And, all of a sudden now we have devices, which we didn't have before, and we have to keep these things on a 12-month-old as much as possible. And, keep up with them. Babies and toddlers roll around, they throw them off, they get stuck on things. I mean, I just had no idea that this was going to be a whole thing when we got our first child activated. Um, and like, guys, we have lost these cochlears between my two children everywhere. We've lost them on the cochlears on hiking trails. They've been thrown into the toilet, not flushed down, but thrown into the toilet. We've lost them in our backyard for a few days. We lost them around our house almost every day. My 5-year-old loses or throws his around the house and we lose it somewhere. My kids, once again, my 5-year-old has taken apart his cochlears and thrown all the little pieces around the car. And we have, been through the car multiple times and still do with flashlights, trying to find little cochlear pieces in the car. He threw his cochlears over a fence into a cow pasture one time, and my husband had to go get it. I was not prepared for like what this process was going to look like, especially with toddlers and little kids. And I wasn't really prepared for the fact that it was going to come with a whole new life, because then also speech therapy started for us. And we had a lot of speech therapy for at least the next 5 years of speech therapy with 2 kids. So that was a big one that I just didn't really realize was coming for us, was this whole new stage in the process and what that really looked like. But I will tell you, now that we're like 8 years into the process, it is easier to keep the cochlears on our kids now. They do ask to keep them on because they're older. They're even able to like help us, with the cochlears. They bring me the things in the morning so that I can help them put it together. Speech therapy is now done through their school because they're in school now. So it does like streamline and get better, but it's a lot in the beginning. It's a lot, honestly, for the first 5 years. So just something to keep in mind as you're going through this process, that this really does kind of kick off a whole new part of the process for you. And really the process that is really the rest of your child's life, right? But also want to wrap this up and tell you that Cochlear Implant Activation Day is a fun day. Okay. It is a really special day because it does move you into the next stage of hearing loss with your kids in a really exciting way. And Activation Day does introduce your family to a lot of new things. It does introduce new things into your routine. It's also so fun watching your kids learn language, and you have a front row seat to learning language, teaching them language, watching them grow in that, seeing, how they start advocating for themselves, educating others. It almost comes so naturally for our kids and for other kids that I've taught to with cochlear implants. And so this stage is really fun, and it is really special too. So I don't want to put you off from cochlear implant activation day. I just wanted to give you a few things to maybe think about and be prepared for that I felt like were big things that I was not prepared for. And if you have any questions about cochlear implants, hearing aids, BAHAs, activation day, surgery, hearing loss process, or any and all in between, come join our Facebook group. We are a community of moms and parents and grandparents and grandmoms who are all parenting deaf kids, and we're all doing it together. And we would love to have you. We would love for you to ask your questions, and we would love to help you find the answers for those questions. So you can come to the Facebook group at facebook.com/group/raising deaf kids. And I hope this episode today calms your soul a little bit about Activation Day. And of course, as parents, we want the absolute best for our kids. And unfortunately, kids, especially kids with hearing loss, do not come with a handbook. But I want you to know that simply by being here and listening, you are doing a great job as a mom or a parent because you are learning and trying to find better ways to help your child. I am so proud of your efforts, and I'm so glad that you're here. I'll see you in the next episode.